Hello everyone, welcome back. So today I want to talk about Hunter S. Thompson's Generation of Swine, Gonzo Papers Volume 2, Tales of Shame and Degradation in the 80s. So, do I really need to introduce Hunter Thompson? He was from Kentucky. He was a journalist through I think the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And he died in the early 2000s. He had a very wild style of writing. He was very fond of mind-altering chemicals, and he developed his own style of journalism where sometimes he would throw in some fictitious elements. So this is a collection of articles that he wrote for a newspaper in San Francisco in the 80s, and all the characters you might expect are there. A bunch of Ronald Reagan's cronies. So there's Reagan, there's George H.W. Bush and Edwin Meese, and we also have Ollie North and Fay Hill. I think that was her name, right? Oliver North's secretary, Fay Hall. And he carried on his sort of wild, ever so slightly fictitious journalism in this book that he showed in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and the Kentucky Derby is decadent and depraved and that sort of thing. And one thing that stood out to me was that although there are some really good gems in this book, it also shows how Thompson was leaning more heavily into fictitious elements, and it was somewhat stale by this point. And I don't just mean because the politics are out of date. It seems like he was leaning far too heavily into that Fear and Loathing persona by this time, and it just didn't quite work for the 80s, I don't think. There was something about it that is overdone. And now I understand that these are newspaper articles, so they're not really meant to be read back to back to back to back the way that I read them. So we will get like a fictitious interview with Gary Hart, who was running for president, and it's clearly fictitious. And some of the boundaries that Thompson would push, there is one that is really kind of disturbing. And it is an article about, and he said later on that it was fictitious and that it was a metaphor for some of the political wheelings and dealings going on, but he talks about how a fox was coming onto his property in Woody Creek, Colorado, and attacking his peacocks, and some of the terrible things that he did to this fox. And it was fictitious, it was made up, but it does not read that way. And you kind of imagine him snorting a rail or something and then writing that and thinking that was a great article and sending it off. And it's a little bit difficult to see how the newspaper published that particular article, because there's no way that wasn't going to draw a backlash, and apparently it did. And one thing that kind of irritated me about this book was that the articles are not in order, and they're not in order by year or anything like that. They're not gathered into a collection about, say, the Iran-Contra affair or that sort of thing. And it was good. There were gems in this book, and I did enjoy most of it. Some of it fell flat. So when I showed this in a haul, James from Quaint and Curious Volumes wondered if it would hold up, or if it would be as stale as the, references to Ed Muskie in Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72. And, well, James, I can report that it's pretty stale. It's pretty stale in places. So I thought that I would read a passage that I really enjoyed. And it has nothing to do with 80s politics or anything like that. And it seems to me to be as close to Thompson as he was without being Thompson the persona. And so It concerns a time when he had some people visiting him from Miami, and it had snowed, and they were driving home at night. They'd gone out to a restaurant in Aspen, about 5 miles from his house, something like that. And on the way back, his headlights went out, and he just kept driving, which must have been terrifying for them. There is no need to mention this business of driving without headlights, except that the lights suddenly went out on my recently rebuilt and totally overhauled Volvo tonight, and I had to run the last 5 miles to the ranch by nothing but the light of the moon. It was one of those decisions that would probably make most people nervous. I was driving out from town after dinner with some people from Miami, and my first hint of trouble came when I sensed that the moon was brighter than my headlights. Which is wrong, as Mr. Nixon said, and it immediately raised questions in my own mind about the true credibility of my night vision. When your headlight beams start looking like the dim glow of some antique Aladdin's lamp, and then even dimmer like votive candles, it is time to seek professional advice. Never mind the unholy moonlight. What happens next week when it's gone? Not even Sitting Bull could drive at top speed in total darkness. Maybe the time has come to see an eye doctor. One of these quacks who runs ads on TV saying to come in and take all the tests, $49.95, guaranteed to correct all your blindness, make you see like a mountain goat. I was flirting with these ominous notions. Too many years on dark roads, too many scars on the retinas, when my headlights went out altogether and the road became like the ocean, as if I were driving a boat. There are no street lights on the sea. We all drive by maps, or buoys and distant markers, and nobody has any headlights. I've run up on sandbars at night going 40 miles per hour when I thought I was right in the middle of the channel. It is an ugly feeling. First there is a bad hissing sound as the bow runs up on the sand, and then the passengers start screaming. They are always worried about sharks when you run them aground at midnight. It requires quick work on the power tilt to get the prop out of the water before it destroys itself on the rocks. After that, you just sit for a while, and nobody has much to say because everybody knows what comes next. Does the radio work? Are we doomed? Can we call the Coast Guard for a tow? Probably not. No answer on Channel 19. Get out in the warm salt water, up to your knees in your neck, and drag the bugger off by yourself. Even a small Mako like mine can weigh 3,000 pounds, and that is an evil burden to be hauling around in the ocean at midnight. It will move about 2 inches every 6 minutes, depending on the rise of the tide. It is like dragging a Buick with 4 flat tires across a gravel parking lot. These things happen to people who drive at night with no lights, on the ocean or anywhere else. So, like I said, parts of it are pretty stale. The politics of the 80s are a long time gone, and if you weren't caught up in the middle of that, you might find it kind of stale and not very interesting. Some of it is pretty interesting. The Iran-Contra bits are pretty interesting. Thompson was wildly off on his prediction that it would spell the end of the Reagan presidency and a stint in prison for Ronald Reagan and George Bush. But there are gems sprinkled throughout. I wish that the articles were in order. That is my one genuine complaint about this. I really wish that they had put the articles in order. Is it worth reading? If you're a diehard Hunter S. Thompson fan, then the answer is going to be yes. If you're not, and you're not particularly interested in the politics in the 80s, then you can probably go ahead and skip this one. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed most of it. But some of it was just boring, to be frank, for me. But give it a shot. You might enjoy it. So that is Hunter Thompson's Generation of Swine. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope I haven't been rambly and incoherent. This has required many takes for some reason. I'm not having a particularly good go at this video. So I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.